Okay, this is Musket Battles Marengo. In Marengo, the Austrians are trying to break out of Alexandria, and Napoleon wants to put an end to the Austrian army. As the Austrian army ran out of supplies, the commander, Melas, made a bold decision. He was going to break out, and this breakout surprised the French. Historically, the French army was beaten, and then Desai showed up and routed the Austrian army. So when you're playing this battle, what you want to do as the Austrian player is destroy the French army or break out to resupply your army. Breaking out means either reaching where this road goes off or where this road goes off. And the French, of course, are trying to prevent that from happening. The Austrian plan today is going to be to break out and basically make a straight beeline to that supply zone. Though it takes almost 7 turns to accomplish this in line formation. So if they get held up at all, they won't make it. At which point the actual battle becomes a matter of destroying one army or the other. The game begins with a turn 0, which is simply the Austrian breakout move. Then you go to turn 1 and you play 8 full turns for the full day. I'm beginning with this whole picture of the map. Get the whole picture of the map in your mind, because of course I'm going to zoom in so you can see the action.
Here are the positions of all the commands initially. Eventually I remember how to pronounce Lan's name.
Turn 0. Austrian breakout move. The Musket Battles uses a movement stick divided into thirds. We're going to begin with O'Reilly's small force here. The whole purpose of this small force isn't to break through or do anything, but it's to force the French to maintain their line and try to keep them spread out. If this were with the main army back here, the French could just turtle up around here without worrying about anything back here. The Austrians are using the minimal amount of forces to keep a threat there. Now if we look at this Austrian column, we can see that the lead block is a cavalry detachment, and they will use the mounted move, right? And then behind it are 2 demi-brigades of infantry. So let me demonstrate how easy it is to move in musket battles. Using the longer mounted move stick for the cavalry detachment, and I want them to spring a little wider, about there. The infantry uses the foot movement stick, and the lead unit can get almost to this road. And I'm going to put them like that. Now we'll move up to Melas's main army in the breakout move. The lead blocks here are cavalry. They can move 2/3 and there. Now there is marsh here, and cavalry and artillery can't move through marsh. Next I want to move this block of light troops here. Then move up to the bridge, turn once for free, and then they can go, like I said, 2/3, right about there. The whole Austrian column will move out. That's it for the Austrian breakout move. And now it's turn 1. For graphic display, I'll place the turn die right there. Now we move by chit draw. First chit drawn is Melas. Essentially, Melas gets a double move. First thing I want to note is how far the infantry can move, so they can get up to about this river's edge here. That's important because, of course, the cavalry is guarding them out front. Now, the cavalry, moving 2/3, could move and contact the French. Of course, they don't want to do that at this point. But what this shows is that to move anywhere in here where I'm going to move them, I don't actually need to measure anything. Here we have the cavalry shield, and they're staying out of the field of fire. The infantry column, because it's crossing some terrain here, moves 2/3. They get just beyond that stream. Next chit drawn is Bonaparte himself. Now Bonaparte's command is way back here. They don't know where they want to be on the whole battlefront here, but they can definitely move forward. And there's a ridge that runs along here, and they can move their full movement if they stay here in this clear terrain. Now here you'll discern that part of the block is actually on the ridge. But as long as over half the block is not, you're not paying for the ridge. They're not occupying that yet. You're going to follow up with the bags. Next chit drawn is O'Reilly. The first thing you do is you move your HQ cube. O'Reilly's right here. Now all these units are in command. What command signifies is that now that they're in command, they can attack.
Making the threat seem real.
Once they attack, the threat is decided and they'll be dealt with. As long as they're not attacking and they're just here, they're a threat. The only danger to the French army is if they ignore them and turn their backs to them. Next command drawn is Ott, and he's right here. He's going to move up to the bridge, cross the bridge, and 2/3 brings him about right there. The next drawn is Murat. Murat is here and he's just going to go straight forward his full move. The next drawn is Lannes. Lannes seems to be facing the full Austrian assault. What's he going to do? Now essentially he's going to shift over this way. At no point in this shift am I going to move over their maximum movement allowance. So I don't have to actually even bother with the movement sticks. I just reposition them. And I'm mentioning this to show you how quickly and easily movement can be affected in musket battles. And last, Victor is drawn. Often when playing musket battles, in fact I would even say more often than not, you want to move last or after the commands in front of you because then you can react to whatever they've done. In this case, now Victor knows where the Austrians are attacking and where his line is threatened. Again, I'm not moving anyone so far as to require using the movement sticks. And Victor believes he has improved his defensive line. That is the end of turn 1, and we begin turn 2. First drawn is Napoleon. Moving 2/3 brings them to this point. I've been forgetting to move this block, which belongs to Desai's corps, but until Desai arrives, moves with Napoleon. Everyone begins in line, but they're going to switch to road column, which costs them 1/3, leaving 2/3, which if they're moving on a road, they can double to 4/3. So in road column, they can move up to there. And now it's Melas. Now one of the tricky things about Melas is that he has a huge command. Most of the army, other than this little group here and this little group here, are under his command. So when he's attacking, he has to be within command range, which is 1/3 of a mounted move, of anyone that might contact the enemy. So where do I want to put him? There, now they can command him, all of these units, and all the way, well, they can't even make it to the enemy, so there. At this point, we're pretty concentrated, it's not really an issue. But how far can the Austrian light troops move? Moving only 2/3, they can't reach these two blocks, but they can reach these two blocks. But note, these light troops are just a detachment. You see how the solid line is broken in the center, and it's not back here in these other units. That's a detachment. Detachments work best as threats. So we're going to move this detachment of light troops over here to be running around in the woods to get around behind the French line. Here's another thing with miniature movement, which is essentially what this is. Here they are, they can move 2/3 because they're crossing some streams. And you might say, oh, they can't make it. But close enough is close enough. They wouldn't get this far and say, oh, we couldn't make it. No, they're going to go ahead and make that attack. As are the gentlemen behind them. They're going to be backed up by cavalry in a combined arms attack. The cavalry is actually waiting till these forward troops become spent. When they're broken up by the initial assault, if the initial assault doesn't destroy them, the cavalry can sweep through. Here's some more Austrian light troops. We're going to send them up off this way. Another thing I neglected to do, this isn't part of the official musket battle rules, but when I play, I use what I call paperless written orders. And what that means is, the way paperless written orders work is that any command that moves has to end its facing the same as the rest of the command, the first units that move. So I'm going to move these guys first, and they ended facing that way. That means these guys have to end facing that way. What this does is it makes moving large formations around kind of clunky. And if you want to do a bunch of different things with them, it takes a while. It takes a few turns. If you're using written commands and we're having to deal with commands getting confused, lost, misunderstood, delayed, and actually even talking about the information getting to the commander so he can write the information out, write the orders. You can go through a lot of hoops to try to simulate that, or you can simply say, look, this is all you can do. Everyone has to face the same way when they're done moving. If they don't move, they can face any way they want. They can just sit where they are. So now this guy's going to move like that, because he has to face the same way as these guys. He's staying 1/3 back so he doesn't get routed into. And these guys are all part of a column, so as long as they stay in column formation, it's only important that the front unit of the column ends its move with the proper facing. Now dragoons, like cavalry, are exempt from the facing rules. They're a little more independent. Now here I moved the Kaiser dragoons up to a point where they're attacking across the river. And that's how they have moved. One little minor thing here now, when you attack, you conform to the defender. So even though these two guys didn't technically end in the same facing. They're pretty close, but if you want to be technical, as these two units. But they moved that way, and then the adjustment was made. They kept that facing until they contacted the unit, then they had to conform to the defender. Now next, Lanné moves. At this point, Lanné is holding. Next, Victor is drawn. Now he's worried about Lanné getting hit with the whole Austrian army. But what can he do about it? Again, with my written orders rules, flanking it, the attack on this side seems like a no-brainer. But now if any of these other guys move, they have to end with this facing. Which is just another way of showing that because it's supposedly written orders, you don't have a bunch of units moving around like independent drones. Victor holds, other than to do this one flanking attack. And now you have O'Reilly over here. He moves slightly forward so as to threaten and possibly hold Victor here.
Here I forgot to move the camera, so please, bear with me. I'm going to use this still, and soon enough we'll get it all back together and lined up.
And then Ott is drawn. Move the HQ first. He'll move there now that his entire command is in command. He'd love to race up here and break this flank, but he can't reach it. So they're just going to move forward, keeping the same facing. Now I have to watch where I'm going so I'm not getting into this guy's field of fire. Now they're keeping the same facing, but on either end of this facing you can refuse a flank. And the last is Murat. What does Murat do? Well, Murat hears the fighting over here. And being Murat, he responds decisively. Along the top of the ridge here, there's nothing blocking his move, so he can move a full movement. Now we move to the combat portion of the turn. The French get to choose the orders of the combats. So they're going to choose this combat here first. It's a flank attack. And we're going to say ouch. The only possible way to inflict 3 hits
with a single die roll
on an opponent is if you're flanking, there's one side of the die is a 3. So the French inflict 3 hits. This is going to really hurt. The Austrians inflict 1 hit. But the Austrian cavalry keeps charging forward. Now, the difference in this
My bad, those are grenadiers and they should only have retreated.
Case is you have cavalry attacking a spent infantry unit. Everything else is the same. So you start with the flank attack. The cavalry get an advantage if they're firing at a spent unit. So this disadvantage die becomes an advantage die. This time the French inflict 1 hit, and the Austrian cavalry inflicts 2. In fact, cavalry is going to flip to spent and retreat, because they don't want to be caught fighting that detachment. 2 hits destroys this block. Here we have grenadiers attacking across the stream, French infantry. French infantry is regular, grenadiers are disadvantaged. So here we've got a disadvantaged die versus a regular die. These grenadiers have the salute symbol, so they ignore the first hit. Neither side does any damage. This is actually great for the Austrians because when attacking across the stream, you're only disadvantaged for the first round of combat. So now, regular dice. They go from doing no damage last round to both doing 2 damage this round. The French flip and retreat. The grenadiers ignore the first hit, and then they flip. Moving on down the line, we have the rest of the Austrian attacks. Austrians attacking across the stream are at a disadvantage. The Austrians are also, this is just a detachment. They only did this to keep them from being flanked. Now here's the result. Detachments can only do 1 hit. On a white result, they do a hit. On a black result, they do nothing. The French do a hit. That eliminates the detachment. In this combat, this is a detachment of cavalry. The cavalry rides off before the first round, which they can do if facing infantry, and that ends combat. Now here we are in turn 3, and the chit order becomes very critical. If Lanné moves first, he can rebuild his line. He'll no doubt fall back, and that actually works well for the Austrians too, because it has the French falling back. If the Austrians move first, this is what they don't want to have happen, because if they move first, sure, they can run up and attack this line all they want, but then when the French move, they're just going to back off. Which simulates a situation where the Austrians have an advantage, but did they take advantage of that or not? You can have all sorts of complicated rules, but it comes down to the chit draw. So let's do this chit draw and see what happens. First one drawn is O'Reilly down here. He holds. He just wants to be a threat. Second one drawn is Malus. This is not what Malus wanted. Now when you're playing two players, Malus could attempt to adjust to alter the order. And if he's successful, another chit gets drawn and his chit gets put away and put back into the cup. But when I'm playing solo, I just let the chits drop where they may. So Malus is next. Malus himself moves first to ensure that as many of his units as possible are in command. Now this light infantry is not in command. They can move, but they can't move to attack. That fits in with his plan. First to move is this spent grenadiers. They're going to attack like that. Now that sets where everyone has to end their facing. Now this is Malus attacking in column, which is something I'm trying. It's not an official rule. You can attack in column, and the column just keeps coming up and attacking. Why don't you always want to do that? Well, if you have a column and the front unit needs to retreat, it's simply eliminated. Or it pushes the whole column back. Basically, it's very expensive. It can be very expensive to attack with a column. Let me know in the comments if you think that's crazy talk or if it makes sense. Next drawn is Murat. Murat moves up. Now his cavalry is in command. He's somewhat limited by the fact that he got drawn before anyone else in the French army got drawn. But that also allows him to do some interesting things. Champeau's dragoons move like that. Now they're not worried about getting flanked because Malus has already moved, so these forward units are stuck right where they are. Kellerman's cuirassiers, which are heavier than the Austrian dragoons, have an advantage, even though they're cracking across the river. So we're going to stay just like that. That's what Murat's cavalry does. Now Lannes moves. Watch this. The lead unit fell back because it's a different command. Now these two forces here end up in each other's field of fire, but they've already moved. There's no combat there. This is a good defensive position behind the river in a town. Even though they're overwhelming forces, they're going to make the Austrians pay. The rest of his command falls back. Napoleon is drawn. He sets his artillery on the ridge, backed up by the guard. And now Ott is drawn. First thing Ott does is his artillery is going to fire on these French units, doing 2 damage. The front unit is just a detachment. And you can't destroy a unit with artillery. And detachments don't push back friendly troops. I move Ott to there, and he orders a charge. That ends his command. Last drawn is Victor. Now Victor sees the writing on the wall and everyone falls back a third. Also on turn 3, I almost forgot, Revaux rides on, part of Murat's command. Charging along the road. They're just hussars, but they love to make an entrance.
And now I remember how to correctly pronounce the name.
We begin with the combat on Lannes' command. The Austrians attacking the French in Castle Soriolo. The Austrians are using the disadvantaged die. And they suffer 2 hits. Well, they're just going to eliminate that. And the Austrians press forward. Next round. This time, the Austrians inflict some damage. Not to be deterred, the French hold. This time the French do 2. Because they're attacking in column and they want to keep up the attack, the unit is removed. The last unit in line. French get a 2 with a red circle. They roll another white result, and they do. That means 3. And the Austrians do nothing. So Keim's entire command is wiped out, and Lannes' men hold. Let's see how Lannes' other command holds. Watrin's demi-brigade under Gency. The French want to fight with Kellerman first. Kellerman, being the heavier cavalry, gets an advantage die. And they both do 2. 2 flips and retreats the Austrian cavalry. One of them is absorbed by the elite, so Kellerman simply flips to spent. Now in the infantry combat, the French get a 1, the Austrians get a 2. The Austrians don't want to retreat, so they're going to take and eliminate. They don't have to do anything because these are the grenadiers. They absorb that 1. And they do 2 to the French, which destroys a demi-brigade. Now we move down to the combat on Victor's Corps. Clear terrain, even dice. The Austrians get a 2, the French get a 2 with a red circle, which means if I roll another white result, and I do, this 2 is actually 3 damage. So this
Ott's demi brigade is eliminated. The French demi brigade has to retreat. Now in this combat, both the forward units, the contacting units, are detachments. The light troops are out front. The skirmishers are doing a fight. And it's across the river, so for this first round, the Austrian skirmishers are using a disadvantaged die. A black result and a white result. So the black result means they do no damage. A white result means they get hit. Now, in the second round of combat, the stream only counts for the first round. Even up, but the French still have the skirmishers out front. The Austrian troops get nothing, but the French troops have a white result. They get a hit. The Austrians do one, and they get a hit. So that gets rid of that light troops, and the Austrians retreat. So essentially, the light troops are able to drive off the Austrians, but there's nothing. They expended themselves in the effort. Now we zoom out a bit, survey the battlefield. Turn 4, midday. Napoleon moves first, and he sets the guard on the ridge, but back far enough that he's not in the field of fire. And decides troops under his command join his guards. Next turn, turn 5, Desai arrives. Victor is drawn next. This is critical because we need to get the bags out of the way. Pull them back to safety. Seeing Melis's artillery, Victor pulls his command to safety, out of the range. And he tells the Austrian commander, the player tells the Austrian player that he's moving them out of the range of command. So if something gets bumped or jostled, the fact is he's moved out of range of the artillery. In Laon, all the French are moving first. Having his position passed, Laon begins pulling back and falling back. Next is O'Reilly. O'Reilly keeps the pressure up, and Melas. Melas brings his bags forward a little bit. Flanks Champeau's cavalry, although the French haven't, Murat has not moved yet, so that isn't going to amount to anything. Before attacking Kellerman, the Austrian artillery opens up, driving him back. Critical, because now the artillery gets flanked, and it's all alone. And these Austrian goons reform. The last Austrian artillery that didn't fire advances forward, sitting just outside of Marengo itself, hoping to encourage the French to keep falling back. And Murat. Murat gets both his cavalry units in command and pulls them back into order. The last O'Reilly moves. He brings his cavalry over towards the center and reforms his line just outside of Spinetta. That's all the blocks. Let's go to combat. The French want to start with the Councillor Guard. Of course they do. Now the Austrians are crossing the ridge. The French are up on heights. French have cover. Austrians have a disadvantaged die. The Guard repulses. No, actually they don't, because this is the Austrian Grenadiers. They ignore the first hit, so that first hit is ignored. But this time they hit him for 2, and that destroys them. Moving on down the line. 1 and 2, 2 at the red circle. The black dot, so it's just 2. Last combat. Austrian luck has not held out this combat. They do 0 damage. The French do 2 with the red circle, and white result for 3. The Austrians are destroyed. Attacking units on a ridge with a disadvantaged die can be very costly. Well, that, my friends, was a disaster. Hopefully this will go better. Next combat. Artillery. Being flanked. Their only hope is the artillery goes first because of artillery. But the artillery does 0 damage, and hussars do 1, which flips them to spent. Now artillery, unsupported, they're not supported, cannot retreat. It's eliminated if it has to retreat in combat. So they're just going to stay. Now it's simultaneous. Austrians get a natural 3, and the French artillery gets a 1. So 1 does flip them to spent, but the French have lost their only artillery. Or the French do have cover. A white means the French do a hit, they retreat. A 1 means the detachment is destroyed. Now we get to turn 5. Desai arrives. Melas looks at his army, his own casualties. Both armies break when they've lost 10 blocks. Now these here are just detachments. They don't count. So we get down here to the real deal, and we can see that the Austrians have lost both their grenadiers, their elites, Keim's entire division, and 2 more blocks beyond that. So they've lost a total of 7 blocks. 3 more of the army breaks. The French have lost 3 blocks, and Desai is about to arrive. Melas surrenders. Napoleon has won Marengo.
The defining moment was when Napoleon's Guard defeated the Austrian Grenadiers, the cream of their army, and the whole attack collapsed. Now they might be able to the Austrians at this point could possibly defend and hold, but that's a loss for them. They have to break out or destroy the French army, and neither of those options are going to occur. Good game.